Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. Welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. This is a presentation created by Behringer-Crawford Museum. We are just going to let everyone who is joining us via Zoom into the meeting. And if you're joining us on Facebook, welcome to you as well. Anyone on Facebook can put comments in the comment section or questions, and we will definitely be getting to those toward the end of the presentation. So hang with us. Glad to have everyone with us. If you're just joining via Zoom, this is Northern Kentucky History Hour, and we are just letting everyone in. It's great to see all of you tonight. It's kind of a special history hour, a little bit, kind of a culmination of an awesome year. So welcome to all of our friends. Okay, it's 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm sure we'll be letting a few people in. So just doing a little systems check here. We are recording. We're live on Facebook. If you're joining us on Zoom, your microphone is muted, but we want to hear from you. So please put your comments in the chat or any questions that you have, and we will look forward to getting those answered throughout at the end of the presentation. So let me introduce myself. This is Northern Kentucky History Hour by Behringer-Crawford Museum, and I am Tara Johnson-Noem. I am the Vice President of the Board of Trustees for the museum, so I'm a volunteer. And about a year ago, my husband and I created this crazy project to get us through the pandemic. And I want to take a special moment to thank Shane Noem, because he is kind of the master of ceremonies behind the scenes. He's often the one that secures our guests. He's the one that sends out the email reminders. He's the person that keeps everything going. He's the one that makes dinner for our family while I'm sitting here doing this. And so if you have been joining us over the last year, we just want to say thank you for joining in this project with us. We truly appreciate it. This is actually my last night to host Northern Kentucky History Hour, but we are very excited to report that the museum will be carrying forward. And so just want to say just thank you so much to everybody who really joined in and really made this something very, very cool. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you can watch the past history hours on Facebook and on YouTube, and there are a lot. It's become this oral history kind of just, I don't know, just this very cool thing for our community. So we are very, very glad to have participated in this. So I also wanted to thank the supporters of the museum who have been with us in what has really been a pretty difficult year. So Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and the Carol Ann and Ralph B. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation. We are also supported by our members. And I just want to let everybody know, I've talked about this a couple times over the last several months. We met our goal. So we actually were able to secure more than 50 new members as a result of Northern Kentucky History Hour. And so we want to say thank you to the new members and thank you to all of you that support the museum. The museum's open, so you can go to bcmuseum.org and find out about the what we have available and the various exhibits that we have, and definitely the hours, because that's kind of important, right? So also we have music at BCM starting up this summer, which is an outdoor event where you can hear about music or hear local music of various genres, which is very cool. So it is now my pleasure. Oops, sorry, I'm gonna let somebody in really quick. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker, who is Matt Becher. He is with the Boone County Planning Commission, and he is let's see, he is a senior member of the Planning Commission staff, and he's going to be able to walk you through the history of the renovation and the building. So Matt, it is all you.
All right, thanks very much. As Tara said, I'm Matt Becher. I'm Boone County's historic preservation guy, for lack of a better term. I've been with the county since December of 2000, so a little over 20 years now. And I've been fortunate to spend all of that time with an office in the old courthouse. I can't say it has been the most perfect union. It is an old building and it has its issues, but it's been a great space, a lot of natural light, and a lot of fluctuating natural temperatures to manage. Anyway, I will share my screen here and show you the presentation. I notice as I'm running through the names list of people on here, I notice a few folks I know. One, my dad, Jerry. Hey, Dad. Janine Kreinbrink. Hi, Janine. I saw some of your presentation on archaeology earlier today when I was trolling through some of the old Northern Kentucky history hours from the last few months. I had completely forgotten the Gaines Tavern archaeology. That shows you how things have gone in my mind in the last few years. Bear with me as I find the share screen part. Can you see me now?
Yep, looks good.
Got it? All right, hit play. I'll try and minimize my little list of folks here. So as I said, I'm Boone County's historic preservation guy, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of the old courthouse, which is now called the Ferguson Center. Building was built in 1889 and was rehabilitated for the second time, the significant rehabilitation, in 2017. And that's the one that really kind of brought it up to modern standards and full functionality at this point. So I'll give you a little bit of the history. I've given various versions of this over the years. But the renovation part was something that Matthew Webster, the assistant county administrator, put together for Northern Kentucky History Day in 2018. And I'm taking some of that and adding to it with thousands of photos that I've gone through over the last few weeks. As I try and get this, there we go. Looks like it's going to want to go on a mouse click. All right, so to talk about the current building, we have to go back a few years to early 1800s, when Burlington was established as the county seat on 74 acres in the north central part of Boone County. At that time, they put together a log courthouse on what was they called the public square, which was a large central square parcel in the middle of Burlington. They built this log courthouse, and a jail, of course, because you've got to have somebody to hold people. And by 1817, they replaced that building with a brick structure. I think this picture on the right-hand side is most likely, there we go. Can anyone see this mouse, little black triangle? I'm hoping. I'll be using it a fair amount to point to things, but this picture on the right, I think, is a sketch of what that 1817 building probably looked like after they added columns and a cupola in 1828. It's about as early as it gets for this building. In 1878, they renovated and expanded that 1817 courthouse even more. And to my eye, it looks like it has almost the mass of the current building. So it's much larger than the original building. There's always rumors of, courthouse fire and all that. As far as I can tell, there were never a courthouse fire. It was more that they outgrew or outmoded the old building and just replaced it. So by 1878, really, I think they debated whether it was even worth doing this renovation. And by the mid 1880s, it was pretty obvious that they needed to have a new building. So in 1889, they came up with the courthouse. Like I mentioned before, they always had a jail across the street and a clerk's building joined soon after. By the 1830s, they had a clerk's building, and then they seemed to replace those buildings, clerk building, jail, every 20 or 30 years. The old building would just get to the point where it was no longer usable. Ironically, this photo on the right here is the county jail. The back part of it was built in 1854, and then it was expanded in the 1870s. And in watching Tony Froelic's presentation from the other day, I learned that this back part of the original 1854 jail was actually designed by Thomas Zane Roberts' father, which I did not know. So learn something new constantly. I mentioned that they had a central square, public square. It's called the public ground, Publick, on early plats. And it was actually all four of these squares joined into one big square. When you came into town on the Pike, you went around on Union Square and out this side, or came up and went around. So this was all public ground originally. They joined it together and sold off the west half of the public square in 1820. Something the county did. I guess they realized they were never going to need any of this other space. So this is 1883 Atlas. And as I said, there's a courthouse. There's always been a courthouse on this site and nowhere else in Boone County. And then the clerk's building here was the offices, and then the jail next to it. And the 1925 jail building is still there now. It's been renovated and turned into something else at present. We look at the 1889 building. It was designed by a prolific architectural firm out of Louisville, the McDonald brothers. These guys built more courthouses. From what I can tell, they designed, or in whole or at least in part, 27 courthouses in at least 6 states, primarily Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Virginia, Tennessee. They actually designed the Kansas State Capitol building. So they were very, very busy fellows in the 1880s through early 1900s. This building cost Boone County $20,000 to build, and bricks were fired on site. And the building was constructed by a company out of Cincinnati called McGarvey Brothers. This version of the design is Renaissance Revival in style, and like all of their courthouses, or nearly all of them, it's sort of a cruciform plan, a central hallway that runs down the main part of the building with offices on either side and a large courtroom on the second floor. We'll see here in a minute that this is a theme that they perpetuated many, many, many times. I'm going to go back one slide. If you look at the top of the building now, this is what it's looked like as far as anyone knew throughout its life. Small cupola, pyramid roof on top of this big 10,000 square foot building. On this photo surfaced around 2002. Somebody locally brought it in and or brought it to my attention and said, I think this is our courthouse, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't look quite right. And what she was talking about is this much larger clock tower. See, we have a small cupola now, and this photo has a large clock tower. In studying it, it was pretty obvious this is our main building, and that lining things up, I knew that this is the Foster Sanford House, which is still in Burlington, and this was where the clerk's building was in 1889 until 1925. So we knew this is our building. The question is, what exactly happened? To figure that out required a little more digging. Bear with me. I'm trying to move the Zoom window off of my presentation so I can see everything. One clue was this mislabeled sketch I found in a McDonald Brothers catalog. It said Washington County Courthouse, Salem, Indiana. Well, they did indeed design a Washington County Courthouse, Salem, Indiana courthouse, but it's not this building. It's a totally different building. This is the Boone County design here, and this is what it originally looked like before they figured out that it was a flawed design, and that the sum total weight of this clock tower, along with the massive wooden truss system underneath it to support it, put so much pressure on the load-bearing brick walls, which are primarily these long walls that cut through the building, and then these transverse walls along the main corridor, that it was spreading the building apart. Within 5 years, there were leaks and cracks starting to appear, and the building was not quite falling apart, but they knew they were in trouble. So the county called up, literally, sent a note over to the folks in Louisville, hey, we'd love to see your plans so we can figure out what to do. Conveniently, those plans were, quote, lost in a fire. The reality is, I think they were sold south, literally sold south to another place I'll talk about in a second. So by 1897, they were talking about rotting the building, literally running steel rods through the entire length of it, which they did. And you can see the ends of them right here and here. If you're up above the courtroom and the room above it, you can see the rods running through the building to try and hold it together. They finally gave up and hired Samuel Hannaford and Sons in 1898 to design a solution. And unbeknownst to me, until Margot Warminski, local architectural historian, Supreme, tells me that Hannaford was an expert at retrofitting buildings with problems like this: church steeples, other buildings with towers, etc. So they had the local experts come in and come up with a solution, which involved cutting off all of this and coming up with a much more refined and smaller, less weighty solution, this cupola and pyramid roof. To this day, if you're standing in back parking lot and there's a light snow on the roof, you can see the line where this part of the building came off. It only shows up so faint, you can only see when there's just a bit of snow on the roof. So that's what happened to the building. It cost them $600 and it was very low key. It wasn't announced in the papers or anything, I can tell you that. They kept it very quiet for obvious reasons. It was a very embarrassing thing to have to do within 10 years after spending $20,000 on your new courthouse. I mentioned that they sold those plans south. Well, what happened was they ended up, I'm not entirely sure exactly who did what, but I was contacted around 2006 by a contractor working in Bandera County, Texas, who had discovered that the building he was working on here on the right, Bandera County, Texas, looked just like Boone County, Kentucky's courthouse, a little bit too much like it. So as it turns out, the architect, man who claimed to be the architect of the Bandera building, was a man named B.F. Trester, who had worked for the McDonald brothers on a prior McDonald brothers courthouse, Trimble County, Kentucky, I think. One of what I would call the prototype courthouses for the McDonald brothers design, of which they replicated various versions of this all over Kentucky. And Trester took the plans down to Bandera and built this courthouse the following year out of locally sourced sandstone. Now there's some differences architecturally if you look at it, but if you see interior photos, which I'm not going to go through because it would take up too much time, it's the same building. It's identical. It's kind of freaky. So the whole mystery of exactly what happened with that may never be solved, which is fine. It kind of adds some excitement and interest to it. The folks in Bandera, by the way, are proud of their twin heritage. They celebrate the twin courthouse and love the fact that there's one up here in Kentucky. In our courthouse, if you go up above the courtroom, there's a room full of graffiti that dates back to 1898. All sorts of messages, lots of things from Boy Scouts and work crews and whoever happened to be in the building. All sorts of little bits and pieces about the roof leaking, trapped up here during a snowstorm. Remember the first Sunday in May, those kind of things. Elsewhere in the building, there are memorial plaques. There's a fireman's memorial out front and other things that kind of designated as an important place in the community. Curiously, there was always a provision for fresh water being available at the courthouse. It goes all the way back to the beginning when they had a dug well and they had a pump out front, and we had a water fountain in the building throughout that time. A few more courthouse family photos, as I like to call them. One is Kentucky's first female sheriff, Glen Rose Williams, 1945. Here she is with Judge Carol Cropper. What I want to point out in this photo, this awesome photo of her getting ready to bust up these slot machines they took out of an illegal place up near Erlanger, is that behind her is photographic evidence of the front door, which had been replaced in the 60s. We didn't know what the front entrance looked like. The aluminum version was atrocious. So in 2003, when there was an exterior rehab, we used this photo and another one similar to it to provide the contractor to design a new front entrance based on these old photos. And they did a great job. Just as an aside, this is the entirety of Boone County's government workforce, probably with the exception of the road crew, in this photo in 1950. That's Judge Cropper, that's the jailer, Pye Presser, various other characters, Dewey Benson, et cetera, et cetera. I would bet there isn't another half a dozen folks that do everything else in the rest of the county at that time. when reading the press release for this the other day, I saw that it mentioned the Kiger trial, and I realized that I completely forgot to talk about the Kiger trial in my presentation. So I went back, I dug up a little bit on that, and then I also found some of the other stuff I've talked about in prior trials or other trials relative to the courthouse. One was this character Eugene Elam in 1965. It's a great photo. I mean, I think he was convicted of manslaughter. So not a particularly a notorious trial, but it's a great photo. This character here, Paul Cordenbrock, was convicted of murdering a store clerk in Florence in 1981. And I just realized today he is still in the Kentucky State Penitentiary on multiple life sentences. This photo was taken out of the back entrance of the annex, which is here. You'll see more photos of this shortly. And then, of course, the most notorious crime and trial ever, Greg Cook's former Bengal quarterback shoplifting charge in 1978 here on the right. Speaking of the Kiger trial, that was the big one from 1943 when Joan Kiger, shown here, 16-year-old, was accused of shooting her father and young brother Jerry to death on a hot August night. It was such a big deal that Burlington turned into a media circus for the week of the trial in December of 43. One of the first photos that appeared in the newspaper, and I have yet to find higher quality photos. I've only found newspaper clippings of most of this stuff. So whatever the better photos it went, who knows at this point. But they schemed out prior to the trial, where everyone was going to be, the defense attorney. Actually, the news people were back in this room. They had to set up an emergency room for typing and then broadcasting, recording things. It was back in this corner in this room here. Curiously, this is the only old photo of the courtroom I've ever seen where you can see the original jury box bar area with these wooden spindles. These are identical to the ones that went down the back stairwell, main stairwell up to the courtroom. One of the guys that used to work there said that they sold those off for 50 cents a piece back in the 1970s at an auction. And the reasons for its demise are not entirely clear to me. As in, also another aside, these pews are not original to the building. They came out of a church in Point Pleasant after they built the building. They were not purposely built for this building. They were acquired from a church in Point Pleasant, and they are identical to the ones in Big Boone Methodist Church. Is another aside. Very curious fact. The Kiger trial, as I said, Joan was accused of killing her brother and father. She also was accused of shooting her mother in the leg. Her mother survived, the other two did not. This is the trial, her older brother back from the service. And this trial had all the makings of a sensationalized event. Like I said, it was covered nationwide. Locally, it was a big deal. Burlington was descended upon by reporters. It had all of the kind of hallmarks of a glitzy trial. The charismatic lawyers. This is Sawyer Smith, the defense attorney. Dramatic presentation of evidence, experts, ballistics expert. Bringing the shot up headboard into the courtroom, those kinds of things. And, news girls in the newsroom or in the courtroom with hot off the presses newspapers. Notice it's above the fold. This is at a time, December of 43, when the Allies are charging up the Italian peninsula. And this is bigger news locally than the war was. And these stories were carried around the country. So it was quite a big deal. In the long run, the trial itself is noted for Sawyer Smith concocting a defense that at the time would have been considered not very unusual. He claimed that Joan was known to suffer from night terrors, was suffering from a nightmare, and woke up in the middle of the night, recovered a couple of her father's guns. Her father had guns hidden all over the house. There's so much more to the story than I can talk about here that I urge you to dig into. Recovered a couple of the guns that her father had hidden around the house, fired at what she thought were intruders, all while asleep, ended up killing the two people and wounding her mother. And the jury agreed with that argument. She was declared innocent of the crime based on essentially an insanity charge or plea, and ended up going to an institution down in Louisville, I believe, for a few years afterwards. So it was sort of a nominal concept at the time, the insanity plea, but it worked. She did not live a happy life after that, however, I can tell you, nobody did. So if you want to look up more on the Kiger trial, a couple of books have been written about it since. And as a matter of fact, the Boone County Historical Society has reenacted it. This is the first time they did it back in 2005. This is in the courtroom. It was really Judge Bruce Ferguson's brainchild to come up with this plan. And they pulled it off. It was great. Here's Asa Rouse as R.L. Vincent, the prosecuting attorney. And here's the full cast of the initial reenactment. I believe they did it again in 2008 and have since done it one or two other times. And you can find recordings of those on YouTube. Really a wonderful way to memorialize what was really a tragic event at the time. I will say, in my opinion, if a smart screenwriter got a hold of this story and really went through it, they could come up with quite a story. All right, let me talk about the building, go back to the buildings. That's kind of the history of the building. Hit up any questions if you want, and I'll cover them later on, because I can't go back and forth and look at the chat right now, or I'll lose this big presentation and get lost. I mentioned earlier the courthouse rehab of 2003. That was only an exterior rehabilitation, cost about $250,000, and it was part of the deal for moving court functions, which were in this room. Circuit Court was in this room until 2002 to the new Justice Center across the street. Part of the deal was they would pay to have the building essentially buttoned up and not mothballed, I wouldn't say, but kind of just set in a good state. So they replaced the roofing. At the time, did a lot of metal work, like this balustrade was almost falling off the building before they got to work. I mentioned that they replaced the front door. You can see the aluminum front door here with something a little more appropriate based on historic photos. Redid all the rotting tin. They ended up having to use copper on the cupola because they couldn't do tin. They just didn't have the ability to do it. It was easier to do in copper, and we said, okay, that's fine. Took out all of the windows one by one and rebuilt them in a not a building, a little trailer they had on site, and put them all back in one by one so that they function properly. And then they installed interior storm windows, which turned out to be functional to a certain extent, but not the best idea. Sadly, it was my idea, and I wish they hadn't done it. They did a lot of masonry work as well, tuck pointing and such. Since then, in 2007, I had a big clean out of all of the stuff that had been left up in the attic over the years. A lot of old court documents, exhibits, law books. Just a 30-yard dumpster worth of primarily stuff that was unsalvageable because it was covered rife with silverfish, bird and bat droppings, and other lovely things. The next year, sort of as a early precursor of the 2017 rehab, DAP students from UC came down and did submeasured drawings of the building, which actually served as a foundation for a larger set that we used for the construction project. People keep asking me, about ghosts. I will say the only ones I've ever heard of have been friendly. The one story I did hear was reported to me by one of the women in child support, who said she was walking down the main hallway on the first floor one day and noticed a man in black sitting at a pew. One of the pews lined the courthouse, the first floor as sort of a waiting area. She walked by him. He was sitting there, well dressed with a cane, just sitting, looking across the hall. As she walked by, she realized he wasn't there. And she figures he is one of the regulars in the building. I've personally never seen anyone, but I don't doubt that they are there. So after the 2003 rehab, it was still leaking. I failed to mention earlier I did kind of allude to the fact that one of the biggest problems that we had with this building over time was a leaking roof. It was an original design flaw, and it's something that just never got licked. So all the way up until 2017, I had a leaking roof. This is my office. I learned how to design a giant funnel that went into a 60-gallon garbage can. Eventually, they got to the point where they were pumping out the water with a garden hose. I want to see if I can fly back and find a roof photo that talks about or demonstrates this. So the reason it leaks is there are these 4 flat areas on the lower extremities above the office buildings or office rooms. And all of this roof slope drains down onto those. Some of it goes down these gutters, but I mean, most of it ends up right on top of these 4 things. And they fill up like bathtubs. And particularly when you've got an ice dam in the spring, you just end up with water pouring in over the flashing and down the walls. I will mention they said something about a trivia question earlier, and I will throw the trivia question out right now. In a lot of the photos I'm showing you, there is something depicted that's older than the building itself. You're going to see it repeatedly. I'm going to go back and see if it shows up in any of these other photos. Yeah, it shows up in almost every one of the photos that I'm going to show you, particularly outside photos. So watch closely for something that's older than this building. And we'll talk about the answer at the end. Let me skip on back down to the 2017 rehab. So by 2017, the building was in rough shape. It needed a lot of work to be brought into modern use. County committed, after doing a fairly thorough canvas of the neighborhood, so to speak, asking the community, what do you want to see happen to the courthouse? And sort of the loud result was, or answer was, community functional space, meeting rooms, places you can have events, flexible space. We looked at the idea of turning it into a theater, a true theater, and it would just have been destructive to try and turn the courtroom into a true functioning theater. It's such a specialized space. That was not going to happen. So we went in, and the court hired Hub and Weber Architects with Century Construction as the primary contractors and busted this project out in 8 months. Really was a rapid turnaround. I've got to thank Judge Moore and then the commissioners at the time, Kathy Flagg, Charlie Kenner, and Charlie Walton, for taking this on. It was sorely needed, and it turned out to be really perfectly timed. So when asking the community, what do you want to do with the building? Number one, community meeting space. To get there, we had to make the building ADA accessible. You could not get to the second floor safely in its current state. There were stairwells, two stairwells up and down, and then an emergency fire escape on the outside of the building. And that was not going to cut it for anybody who needed either a wheelchair or walker or had trouble moving around. So it was a totally unfunctional second floor for any serious kind of function. To do that required an elevator, leveling out the floors, putting in ramps, et cetera, et cetera. Other big deals, stabilizing and upgrading the systems. They were all outdated. Electrical system, in particular plumbing, restrooms are totally inadequate. We already talked about the roofing being a huge leaky issue, side drainage also an issue, and then the deteriorating masonry. And finally, one of the things I kept arguing for, which they, of course, agreed was important, was kind of valuing, restoring, stabilizing, whatever it took, some of the really key historic features of the building to really kind of give it its character. I can show you first floor plan. This is basically what the students drew in 2008. So thank you, shout out to the AAP for that work. Before the rehab, drug court was occupying the west side of the first floor. Child support was on the right side primarily, and all of the annex, that's where they are now. This main hallway and side hall were really used for flexible space meetings. Child support has or the county attorney has their annual Christmas luncheon here. It's a substantial space and very functional. Back rooms for storage. This was just full of shelves and storage materials. This room was a mess. The ladies' room was here and the men's room is here, and they're essentially glorified closets from about 1910. Afterwards, the goal was to turn these into modern restrooms. So now we've got a women's room here, men's room here, 3 stalls in each of them. Same upstairs. So we went from 2 toilets in the building to a dozen. So it actually can handle sizable functions. Afterwards, we've got flexible display and meeting function space in both of these rooms. Historic preservation, where I am, is down on the first floor. This is still flexible space and has been used extensively since COVID hit last year. Child support remains where they are and got upgraded facilities, particularly storage in the basement. Second floor, before my leaky office was here, the secondary leaky office was over here. The courtroom had been vacant since 2002 and was just slowly falling apart because of intrusion of the elements, essentially. And then a way outdated HVAC system. It was just worked to death. And these back rooms were a mess of storage. Afterwards, we've got, like I said, bathrooms on both sides, usable storage, flexible space for meetings if needed. The AV room is back here now. All the stuff that lights and powers and gives sound for the community room is back in this room under lock and key. I didn't have it on the plans because it wasn't drawn at that time, but the elevator ended up going right here. So this all got demolished and in child support space, and the elevator is right there.
Hey, Matt, we can't really see your cursor for some reason.
Can't see the cursor?
No.
Hang on. Can you bear with me? And does anybody out there know how to enlarge a cursor on a Mac?
I don't know if it's particularly easy. I think if you show it in this view,
is it bigger?
Yeah,
right,
you can
let me
see
try
it.
that.
Yeah. I think that's fine to be able to see your slides on the side.
Let me see if I can hold this one. I'll have to close that sucker.
I can see the cursor now.
You can see the cursor now? Okay. Why don't I just enlarge the view? Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's
Good.
great, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
the elevator here, you'll see some more of that as we go on. Now, I think what might happen with this, let me try this. Oh, I can't do it in this small view. I'll have to go back and forth to this when I need to point something out. These are some overview shots of the courthouse. If you look pre-rehab, sort of general photos, if you look at that lower left photo, you can see the metal back door that was built, I think, in the 1960s. That's what the front door looked like in the 60s, which were replaced with wood in the 2003 rehab. And one of our targets for this job was to replace that with something better. If you look at that lower left photo, you can see there's two different colors of brick. That is original. We're not entirely sure what happened, but apparently when the McDonald brothers came out and inspected the building, they weren't too happy with how it looked. So that is not correct. There was a mistake made. The lower right photo shows the exterior fire escape, and then that it ends up getting replaced during the project. Here's some more generic around the building. Can everybody see these okay? Are they large enough, I hope?
Yeah, they look great.
Okay. The courtroom on the upper left, the main hall on the upper right, the entrance to the courtroom on the lower left, and you see there's a couple stairs there that go into the room. That was part of the elevated floor, which we had to remove in order to make this upper floor ADA accessible. And the lower right photo is pretty typical of what the first floor rooms look like. Lots of paneling, drop ceilings, and who knows what hidden behind them. Kind of a highlight of the low light, so to speak, the masonry for the rehab. You can see, particularly in that center photo on the bottom, spalling brick, missing bricks. This photo on the lower left was taken in that passageway between the courthouse and annex. And there were chunks of brick laying on the floor or on the ground back there by the time we got going. So it was almost a danger point with this area with brick falling off. It was all because of a sandblasting done in the 60s that actually Judge Ferguson told me one day, said, that is one of the things I really regret that I approved in my administration, was sandblasting that building. You see on the right photo here, there's a lot of brick that's spalled off, and that lighter mortar is a Portland cement mortar. And what it does is reacts negatively in so many ways with old soft brick, and it ultimately just ends up popping the fronts off between that and the sandblasting. So the masonry was a mess. So was the sandstone water tables and lintels. The roofing, the big culprit. This is one of the bathtubs, the main bathtub in the back. As I said, all that water flows off that big roof. overwhelms the box gutter on the left and goes down into these bathtubs that fill up in the winter. And that tiny little drain hole on the lower right there can't handle the amount of water that comes out of it. So it just flows up over the flashing, which you can see is not properly done in the upper right photo there. The membrane is not put in the proper way. It was one of the problems. So water just flows into the building. We talked a little bit about the entrances already. You can see that reconstruction in the upper right from 2003, and we're going to do the same thing to the back door on the lower right. More interior photos, lots of paneling, wallpaper coming off, ceiling tiles disintegrating from water infiltration. What's behind some of that paneling? Sort of a mixed bag. In some cases, we found that they just kind of furred around the old woodwork and paneled over it. This lower left photo ends up being, that's the Historic Preservation Office now. Again, all paneling. And then the lower right was the old Historic Preservation interns room, and that is one of the few surviving faux stone fireplaces. There were 8 of them at least at one time, and there's 3 left. Back hallway going upstairs on the left, this lower center shows the mismatched floor between the annex, which is the lower level, and then the upper level is the main floor of the courtroom. So this is one of the issues with getting people in and out. You know, you've got stairs upon stairs to get somebody in there. So the new elevator opens just opposite that center door, and you can roll right into the courtroom. Flooring throughout the building, you know, people had these visions of beautiful wood floors. None of it. That wood floor in the lower right is a subfloor. Everything else was either tile, which is the main hallway, or linoleum. Linoleum is an historic product. The courtroom itself had what's called battleship linoleum, sort of an amber or brown colored linoleum. Stuff was incredibly durable, which is why they used it, and it was cheap, which is kind of a hallmark for these guys. So they had the battleship linoleum in the main hall, in the main room there, the courtroom, and then the quarter rooms had a marbled green and black, almost psychedelic paisley looking linoleum, which I thought was really, really cool. And I begged them to put it back in there, but they wouldn't do it. They wanted the industrial carpet tiles, which I get. As I said before, they had restrooms. There's the men's room and a ladies' room. Each got your own closet, almost barely functional. The electricity, we had 3 panels in the building, and this is on the lower right is probably the best of the bunch in the annex. The others were little scattered ones elsewhere in the building. You never knew exactly where you needed to go if you blew a fuse or tripped a circuit. I talked about the fact that we wanted to preserve important features. So the upper left here is the main hallway covered in plastic. That was step 1 before they did any demo work. Once they started tearing out paneling and other bits and pieces, we got to see kind of what the walls look like behind the paneling. In the upper right photo, the woodwork underneath the door of underneath the window has been cut off. Other rooms it was intact, so it really just varied. You can see the lower right there. I showed a picture earlier of that room that had paneling and shelving, and here it is. That room wasn't as in bad a shape as we thought, but the ceiling was coming in. Upper left room, that is one of the display rooms that I showed in the first floor, flexible display room. See in the middle of it, there's a fireplace. It turns out there were fireplaces in all of these rooms that had been long covered up and buried behind plaster. I think when I looked at the old photo from 1889, the original photo, you can see fireplaces in the middle of the building, or chimney stacks in the middle of the building. Those were gone by 1903, the next photo of the building. So these were probably put into or covered up early on. More generic photos around during demolition. The main stairwell was basically left untouched. Just cleaned it up and put a new set of carpet runner on it. I'm going to focus in a little bit on bathrooms. This photo on the left was the men's toilet room and a storage room behind it, which is an absolute mess and had been pretty much buttoned up for 50 years maybe, and no light, basically a mechanical room. The photo on the right is the first floor women's room as you come in the back door on the right-hand side. That's what it looked like kind of right after demolition. And then so I'll go through the upper right photo. To have a bathroom in a building like this, you've got to have a plumbing wall. And you can see that on the right-hand side of that photo. They're starting to put in a stud wall of metal studs where the plumbing is going to go. It's not an ideal solution, but it was the best solution we could come up with for this building. And it's reversible. So they didn't cut any existing surviving historic material to install this. Smarter, better funded people in the future can choose to take this out and put this room back into some other use, probably storage would be my guess. Lower left, you can see we're getting a little farther along. And then on the right, they've got most of the plumbing in, tile floor is in. Left photo shows it with the fixtures in, and the tile floor preserved. And the right-hand side is the final finished bathroom. There's, like I said, 4 rooms like this in that now. Going back to the making it ADA, 2 big issues. The elevator was number 1. This is a significant part of the project. That upper left photo is taken right after they demolished the wall right across from the main sort of reception office for child support. That's the split door behind the orange ladder. And then the right-hand door there is the back exit out of the annex courthouse junction into the back parking lot. So on the right, upper right in there, they're digging a big hole. Got to have a hole to put all that mechanical stuff in, and the lift machinery to elevate the elevator. And that hole is a wet, soupy mess. There is some bizarre water table in Burlington, a very high water table that makes digging things like this very challenging. You can see in the other 2 photos, they're laying up the wall for it, the elevator shaft. On the outside, here's that entrance I keep talking about, the back entrance, where that fresh concrete is. Used to be a stairwell that went down into the basement of the annex, which was barely functional and needed to go for this to be an ADA entrance. So that concrete is the proper slope, and of course doesn't have a stairwell in the middle of it. The right-hand photo on upper right shows the reverse of the photo I showed on the upper left. You can see the elevator shaft on the right with the door opening. And then the lower left photo there is upstairs, finished elevator opening at the courtroom level on this side. It's programmed to go down 4 feet and open on the other side and into the protected space for the child support on the other side, which is the carpet level. You can see this lower right-hand photo. You can barely make out the air conditioning units on top of the building and the elevator penthouses to the left of it. State had us paint that brick orange to match the building as best as we could. So that's the elevator. The other big deal was the courtroom floor. If you look on the back of those 2 photos, on the left-hand side in particular, you can see that the wall stops about 18 inches above the floor. Well, that's how high the floor was originally. It was a sloped floor designed to accommodate a gallery rising to see over people ahead of them down to the judge's pulpit. If it really made, I don't think it really made a difference, to be honest. I never felt like it did when I was sitting in there, and I'm not exactly tall. The upper right photo shows the landing outside the courtroom and looking into the now gone courtroom floor where those 2 steps were. So we had a problem. When they took out the floor, there was nothing there but studs laid in different directions. Sometimes there was a subfloor, sometimes there wasn't. It was a mismatch. None of it was, nice wood floor as some expected. So we had to go in, and contractors put down a new subfloor and eventually laid in on the lower right. You can see a hardwood floor that went around the edges, and the center is carpet. If this had been all hardwood, it would have been an echo chamber, and it also would have cost significantly more money, but it would have been much less manageable than hardwood all the way around. You can see on the lower left photo here, that's the demonstration of the slope, 18 inches down to nothing, probably over 20, 30 feet. And we did end up capturing that slope by using wood trim. So we can talk about it as a talking point for the building itself going forward. I mentioned some of the key details we wanted to preserve. One was the back door. Here's the kind of genesis of how that happened. This guy in the lower right is a master carpenter. To pull this off, this and what I'm going to show you here in a minute was really impressive work. This is the next piece he did, was basically reconstructing this missing bay for the courtroom. You can see here it had been turned into that fire escape in the 60s. Lower left photo, he started punching some holes to kind of get a sense of, what they're up against. And as it turns out, the original opening was still there. That had just been filled in, and it was fairly clean. So all he had to do was figure out how to get the casement, which is in the lower left in the center, lower left photo there, the center bay, to fit into what was essentially a completely racked and out of square space. So, like I said, the guy was a master. He really knew what he was doing. The windows, of course, were pre-made. So we had to accommodate both casing into a hole that didn't fit to match a rectangular window. And he did it. If you go in this room now, you could not tell until you're within a few feet that center window had been gone and that this is a completely new window and opening. Really a wonderful part of the building. Another great element that we didn't know going in what we would find was the courtroom ceiling. It had been covered up with these acoustic tiles in the 60s, and really had no idea what was up there. Turns out it was this really beautiful pressed tin ceiling. Not in great shape, not in horrible shape, but it was more or less 95% there. That center section, I think, was probably a chandelier or some other kind of lighting device. Who knows for sure, but what we ended up having to do was take out a lot of the other tiles in that center section to repair other parts of the ceiling, which worked out okay, because you see in the upper left photo there, they ended up plastering over that center section to put in a big ass fan as an important part of the HVAC system for this room in particular. You can see on that upper left the prep that went into the ceiling itself is phenomenal. All the holes, nail holes, missing pieces of metal. I remember at one point birds were flying in and up out of one of the openings in the ceiling. And we chose this color palette. It's a good, reasonable color for that era. A couple other details I wanted to point out. Little things make a difference, like this trim piece. That cost $800 to make the knife that creates this unique trim. But it was something we needed to rebuild this door, a couple of others, and it was replicated and used elsewhere in the room, in the building, and the county retains it so they can use it going forward. The first floor hallway is essentially untouched, preserved, beautified, and then the ceiling redone and appropriate lighting put in. I'll show you some befores and afters of the building. This is the courtroom before, as it had stood since the 60s. That's what it looks like now. This was probably Christmas of 2019 is my guess, maybe 2018, right after the building went into service. Another presentation in the room, those little plaques on the back wall there. There's 4 of them in various colors. Those are, there were 4 unique tiles in the ceiling. And what they decided to do is take them all down and preserve them in various states. One is as it was, darkened and nasty from smoke and whatnot. And that's the one just to the right of the door. And then a cleaned up one to the left of the door, a completely bare metal one all the way to the left, and all the way on the right is what the finished one looks like in the ceiling now. They made a few other framed pieces like this for the judge's office, and there's one in the historic preservation, things like that. Show the beauty of that ceiling. This is what that exterior fire escape and bricked in opening looked like before. That's what it looks like today. I won't say it's indistinguishable, boy, it sure looks a whole lot better. It lets in, significantly more light. It's really a nice feature and change. This is outside of one office, which is actually a historic preservation office. It's what it looked like before, that split door. Lots of stuff on the walls. Nothing horrible. I mean, it was okay. You can see the baseboard in that photo is kind of cheap vinyl, which was throughout the building. It had been taken out. After the rehab, that was one of the big deals, was a decent toe strip, baseboard, and base molding shoe throughout the building, something that we believe was similar to what was there originally. and then a new door using those trim that was designed using that router knife I talked about earlier. Reverse of that photo, split door gone, replaced with a better door. Upgrade all around, no more paneling. Room next to it, lots of paneling, leaking, drop ceiling. The upgraded room, this is one of the display rooms, which is currently being used for parks seasonal staff training. So they're in there most days, at least for a little while. So this room gets a lot of use. And the small courtroom across the hallway gets a lot of use as well. Lots of discussions around the cigar-shaped table in there. That's used almost daily by child support. Upstairs room behind the courtroom. We saw several photos of this over time. Over the course of the presentation, you can see the leaking ceiling in the first photo and the second photo. It's a dramatic change. This room, for the most part, is now used for storing things that will be used in the main room, but it's can certainly be put into function for meetings and other discussion work anytime. The exterior, before and after some of the brick, a lot of new brick, a lot of better tuck pointing, got rid of as much of the Portland cement mortar as possible and replaced it with a suitable sand and lime mortar mix mortar joint. And then one of the most remarkable transformations that no one will ever know or realize is this back wall. That's where the women's restroom was. And you can see in the left-hand side of that upper photo, the men's room. Windows, I think, were put in around 1910. And that's what the back wall looks like now. I looked at it again today, and if I didn't know there had been a window there, I'd never know there was a window there. They did a phenomenal job with that part in particular. The roof doesn't look a whole lot different, but it is dramatically more functional. New copper box gutters, and you can't see it in the photo, but all of this membrane is built on essentially a thin wedge that forces the water in one direction. And it's all going to the center and running down a new, better drainage system. It's not being forced through a 2-inch pipe that drains the entire building. Back entrance before and after, reconstructed from what we believe the front door looked like, which was itself a reconstruction. Slowly trying to reverse what had been done to this building over time. Here's that storage room I mentioned behind the men's room on the first floor, before and after. From a complete mess, a functional mess. I mean, you could put a lot of boxes on those shelves, and they did, to a room that can be used now. Upstairs, kind of the same thing. Disintegrating ceiling, now buttoned down and very functional. There's the courtroom door out the door of this facility. And then I'll point out, this is a photo I just took. If you look on the floor, you can see the blue X's. You know what those are for. That's from the last year. And with COVID, this building has seen more use than I ever would have imagined. I mean, before, it was booked most weekends upstairs, the main room, for wedding receptions, birthdays, special events, retirements, you name it, in addition to government functions, meetings of all sorts, presentations. But man, has it seen a lot of use, because it was space that you can put people in at a distance, where before they were jammed into rooms that under non-COVID protocol is not a problem over in the Justice Center. But here, you can spread them around, which is what's been happening. So this hallway itself has become very useful. All the rooms on the first floor and the entire courtroom, former courtroom, committee room now upstairs is used for discussion, meetings, private one-on-one meetings. This is I just want to show you a few photos of kind of how the building has been used since it went back into service in 2017, at the end of 2017. This is one of my favorites. It was a quilt show in 2018, and they used every square inch of the building. There were quilts everywhere. They had discussions, display materials, presentations. There's multiple photos I could show you of the courtroom itself. They had turned into a series of hallways like a maze with giant quilts hung on racks. Really a phenomenal use of the building. Again, I mentioned all sorts of things are done in the building, including preservation wards on the upper left, one of the comprehensive plan meetings we had there on the lower right. And then on the lower left, that's the Historic Preservation Board I staff. And I thought I'd throw in an ad at the last minute here for reservation information. Call 859-334-2123 and talk to Kate King. She'll set you up with a reservation for there we go, either the main hall or one of the first floor rooms. And it's very, very reasonable to reserve these rooms. Less expensive for residents, and even for, I think, a full day over 4 hours up in the main hall for a non-resident is $200. For a 200-seat room, you'll have a hard time finding something better. So that's my little plug for putting this building in good use going forward.
Absolutely. And it is gorgeous. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier, Matt, but I studied historic preservation a bit in grad school at UC when I was studying planning. So I was kind of geeking out here as you were kind of showing the before and after pictures. They're spectacular. You should feel so proud of this project. It's incredible. So great job, and such an asset for the community with being able to use these spaces. We did have a couple questions. I know we're kind of tight on time, but let's start with the quiz. And then if anybody wants to hang with us, we'll talk for just a couple more minutes and answer everybody's questions. If you want to unshare,
Okay.
I think we can handle these questions without that, and then we can see your face. First of all, let's talk about the quiz. So there's something outside of the building that has been there longer than the building. We had a couple of different guesses. So can you tell us what is it?
Can I show you real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the simplest thing to do, because it becomes obvious. Give me a second to run back a couple of slides here, and I'll reshare.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I should have not have told you to unshare.
Here we go. Okay. Something older than the building. Did you have an answer?
Well, we have two different answers, but I think it's the tree, right?
Yep.
The big tree. Look at that.
That's a green ash tree that is probably from 1850. It shows up in the 1878 photo of the older building and is still there, and it is a war horse. I mean, it's taken a beating. It looks rough, but it's healthy and hopefully will outlive me.
So a green ash, I don't think I've even heard of that, but I've heard of ash, but that is very cool. So we had a couple of correct answers.
Okay.
And host prerogative. So Janine Kreinbrink, great job. First to answer correctly. Same exact moment that she answered, Mark Koenig also said the tree, as did Roseanne Kramer. So I'm going to kind of double check my history here.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Roseanne has not received one of our pins, because in addition to bragging rights, I neglected to mention this, but you do get a little BCM History Hour pin. So Roseanne, we will make sure that you get one of those. Roseanne, if you could please direct message me your mailing address here, like kind of right now, that would be great. And then Mark Koenig, if you could do the same, that would be great. And we'll make sure you guys, Janine, we know you're already a winner, Janine. But it was a great presentation, as Janine also said in the chat. So we agree. Very cool. And that's so cool that tree has been standing for so long.
I love it.
Fantastic. That was a great question. So here's two questions that the audience put forward. One of them was, you talked about the Bandera County Courthouse.
Yeah.
Is their cupola still standing?
Their original clock tower exists. And that building leaked like a sieve as well.
Nice.
They all did. I called half a dozen of these McDonald Brothers courthouses in Kentucky and Illinois and Indiana, thinking about trying to do some grant program. And I said, how's your roof? And literally everyone said, oh, it leaks horribly. It's leaked the entire time.
Oh my gosh. Well, it definitely, given the picture that you showed in your office, it was definitely a good idea for you to work on this project, right? And to get that fixed, because that is terrible. So the other question that came up, and I found this was interesting. was there a gallows or anything similar at the courthouse when it was built?
Nothing I've ever heard of.
Okay.
There was, there's rumors in history, talk about a hangman's tree out on Burlington Pike and photos of it. Sadly, Boone County had a reputation as a lynching county, and we could go into that at great length, which I will not do. But there's no real discussion about on the court grounds there being anything like that.
Gotcha. It is an interesting dynamic with the government center and the courthouse center kind of being together, right? And sort of the dynamics of that. So I had some questions.
Sure.
So just curious, why do you think they covered up the fireplaces? Just because other sources of heat, or it just seems odd to me.
My best guess is that when they put steam heat in the building in 1910, and that's my guess, is that they covered them up to then. They decided they no longer needed them. Those ones in those bigger rooms may not have been had mantles. They might have just been brick openings, whereas the corner offices always had these gorgeous faux stone mantles. So they kept those. They may have been non-functional as well. I really don't know.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I bet it was cold in there in the winter.
Had to be.
And
then
in the summer.
and then the pews, or benches that were there kind of before the renovation. I saw in one of the pictures that they, had been moved to another room. Were those kind of just distributed throughout, or what happened with those?
A bunch of them are still in storage in one of the parks facilities for use as of yet to be determined. A number of them were disintegrating when they came out of the building and turned into pieces really for stabilizing the others. A lot of them went back into the building, and there's others scattered around other county facilities.
Yeah.
It's neat to see them when you walk into a building. Hey, there's a pew.
Right. No, they look really cool. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but this has been a fantastic presentation. If you haven't had a chance to look at the chat, there's quite a few positive comments that you might want to read. But definitely have appreciated this, and I kind of want to go back. I will just say kind of a personal comment. My kids are watching on Facebook, and they did make a comment to me via text message that said, wow, it seems like they made some mistakes when they built the building. Yeah, for sure. So we've all learned a lot. Super interesting. I do want all of our guests to know that the next presentation will be on June 2nd, and it will be Julia Fair, who is a local reporter, if you do not know her work. And she is going to be talking about the Bristow Family Cemetery. So I think that'll be really fantastic. And then apparently there's something happening over here. So just bear with us for just a second, folks.
We just want to thank Tara and Shane for all of their hard work in putting together the Northern Kentucky History Hour. It's been a wonderful project, and we've got big shoes to fill to make sure this program keeps going on. So this is very much.
All right. Well, thank you again to everyone who has been with us this whole year. And I hope that these programs and these presentations have kind of helped you add some sunshine to kind of a long year. So Matt, thanks for being a part of our final one, but it's not the final one because again, June 2nd is going to keep going just with a new guest host. So see you all soon in other ways. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.